Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk to you about The Hunger by Alma Katsu. So The Hunger was the winner in the horror category of my TBR tournament, and as such I had to read it in the month of May. And it was actually a book that I had been anticipating reading for a very long time, I believe since 2017. I originally heard about this book on booktube, and ever since hearing about it I just really wanted to read it, and I finally did. The Hunger is an interesting novel just in concept. It takes a historical event and adds a horror flair to something that was already very tragic. The Donner Party is part of American history. When the West was being pioneered, people would set out from the Midwest or from the East and bring as much as they could with them, and had to kind of just make their way out west in these long wagon trains. And the Donner Party is infamous because they didn't make it to their destination. The party had actually become stranded, run out of food, resorted to cannibalism. It's one of those stories of American history that's not, a great story to retell, but yet we've all kind of heard about it. And so the author has taken that event and has sort of given a supernatural horror explanation as to why the things happened that happened. I really liked this book. It's kind of a slow build horror novel with, small incidents taking place leading up to, the character's realization of what's going on. And then from that point, a lot of death and a lot of destruction. All of the reasons that I would think that this book might give me trouble, it didn't. So I'm not a huge historical fiction fan. I find reading about historical events rather difficult, and not once while I was experiencing this book did I resent the fact that it was a story taken from history. I didn't. It was very easy to relate to, I guess, is more of what I want to say. So that's the barrier between me and historical fiction, is that I don't find stories or characters from history to be very relatable. Historical fiction for me is kind of like fantasy, right? The worlds of historical fiction are as accessible to me as the worlds in fantasy novels. So I was a little afraid of that going into this book. I was a little worried that that would really affect my enjoyment of it. Turns out it did not. And I don't know if it's because it's horror and because I got this, because of the infamy of the source material, the original story, but it was kind of this delicious, like, ooh, scandalous, that part of you that wants to know more about really bad things. This book kind of spoke to me in that way. Now, I will say that I expected it to be different than it was. And I don't want to spoil it for you, but I will say that I really expected the author to take it in a completely different direction than the actual historical events. And I don't feel like she did. She made just this very subtle supernatural tweak to the book to turn the story into fiction and to turn it into a horror novel, which was surprising to me, but I appreciated that at the same time. Because it rang true. It felt very true. After you read The Hunger, you may sit around and think, but is this really what happened? Because there's a believability to it that I didn't expect going in. I expected the factual part of the story to be completely lost, especially knowing that it was going to a supernatural place. Instead, after reading it, I'm thinking, what if this is really what happened? There's a lot of characters in this book, which isn't hard to believe. A wagon train going from the middle of America to the western United States. I mean, they could be 200 people. They'd be like small towns. It would be like packing up your small community, or maybe your high school, for instance, is kind of a comparable size. We don't all really live in small towns anymore. But I mean, I like graduated with 300 people, I believe. So it would be like packing up your high school or your graduating class and deciding to walk hundreds of miles together. But 87 members of the party, 48 survived. That's information that I'm taking from Wikipedia. To me, there were a few that stood out more than the others. One is Tamsin Donner, the wife of George Donner. She's in fact the second wife of George Donner, and both of them came into the marriage with children from their previous relationship or ships. So she is probably, oddly enough, one of the main characters, and yet not very likable. Tamsin's not extremely likable. The other the other character of note, I think, is Charles Stanton, who is a single man in the party, and he has sort of exceeded the age in which it is appropriate to still be a single man. So there's a lot of questions about him. And there's a girl in the party that he's sort of interested in named Mary. So she's kind of a key player. Tamsin and George have a daughter. I believe it's Tamsin's stepdaughter, who plays an essential role in the story because she sort of has a gift of hearing voices. And the voices are telling her, you know, that as they keep making bad decisions, the voices become more insistent that they're going to die. She becomes very afflicted by that. And then there is another character in the book who doesn't stay with the party for long. He actually goes ahead. He appears at that point mostly through letters that he's writing, telling of his experience to his wife Margie, and at times Charles Stanton as well. So he's a character to pay attention to. And then, you know, there's a villainous character amongst them. So that would be my one, and it's not even a complaint, because I don't know how you tell this story and isolate it to 2 or 3 characters. I'm not sure that's possible, but that would be my one difficulty with it, is keeping everybody straight. Like, there were so many characters that only the very notable for me are memorable. Not a fault of the book, a fault of the reader. The memory thing, that's my fault. This book, you know, is not going to have a happy ending. Like, if you recognize it as a historical horror based on an actual event, I mean, you can kind of recognize that it's not going to have a happy ending. Even the people that survived the original event, I mean, by the time they were located, I mean, they had spent 4 months in the mountains in the winter time and with barely any food. Like, so I mean, it's not a joyful, happy story. Nobody has the time of their lives on this trek to California. But I mean, the story does end especially tragically for some people. And it reminds me of Anya Elborn in that way. Totally different authors, but that same sense of dread, the sense that you know it's not really going to work out in any sort of way, yet you still find things in the book to be hopeful about. I found things in The Hunger to be very hopeful about. Now, whether or not Alma Katsu squashed my hopes, that's a whole nother story. But it just makes it entertaining. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure on occasion I would pick up a book that's just 100% dread, but those little glimmers of hope, like a small romantic subplot, and then kind of like the juicier, scandalous, gossipy stuff that we're, as humans, kind of feed off of. No pun intended there. But all of that stuff kind of just makes it an enjoyable novel, on top of being affecting and doing a good job at retelling history in a very creative way. I'm really glad that y'all voted for this and that I finally got it read. I'm also intrigued because for a while Every time I see the book The Terror by Dan Simmons, I'm always like, do I want to read that? I kind of want to read that. But it's historical. But there is a little blurb on the back of The Hunger that says, much like Dan Simmons' The Terror, Alma Katsu's accomplished engrossing novel weaves a cocoon of supernatural horror around a historical tragedy. So that pretty much sells me. My enjoyment of this book pretty much sells me on reading The Terror. And it makes the decision for me, which is awesome because I don't like to make those. So I would highly recommend this book. I think that I would say this book is 4 stars. But please take that rating with a grain of salt, because much like Fantastic Land, this feels like a book that needs to be reread. And that's 2 books back to back that I feel like need to be reread. And I go months without reading a book that I feel like I need to reread. So it's kind of coincidental that it would be these books. It's more likely that it would be me. So just take that with a grain of salt. But I mean, 4 stars ain't bad. Like, it's probably either going to be a 4-star or a 5-star. And right now I'm just saying 4 because I feel like I need to reread it. But there you go. Those are my thoughts, my ramblings, my explanation of the book The Hunger by Alma Katsu, your winner in the horror category of the TBR Tournament 2020. If you've read it already, let me know in the comment section down below what you liked, didn't like, if you agree and disagree. If you haven't read it, let me know if you're likely to. Was I your guinea pig? And now you're going to go read it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon.